Chapter 3 of The World Set Free by H. G. Wells. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adam Marsatich. June 2009, Alexandria, Virginia. The World Set Free by H. G. Wells. Chapter the Third. The Ending of War. Section 1. On the mountain side above the town of Brissago, and commanding two long stretches of Lake Maggiore, looking eastward to Bellinzona, and southward to Luino, there is a shelf of grass meadows, which is very beautiful in springtime, with a great multitude of wild flowers. More particularly is this so in early June, when the slender asphodel St. Bruno's lily, with its spike of white blossom, is in flower. To the westward of this delightful shelf there is a deep and densely wooded trench, a great gulf of blue some mile or so in width, out of which arise great precipices very high and wild. Above the asphodel fields the mountains climb in rocky slopes to solitudes of stone and sunlight, that carve round and join the wall of cliffs in one common skyline. This desolate and austere background contrasts very vividly with the glowing serenity of the great lake below, with the spacious view of fertile hills and roads and villages and islands to the south and east, and with the hotly golden rice flats of the Val Maggia to the north. And because it was a remote and insignificant place, far away out of the crowding tragedies of that year of disaster, away from burning cities and starving multitudes, bracing and tranquilizing and hidden, it was here that there gathered the conference of rulers, that was to arrest, if possible, before it was too late, the debacle of civilization. Here, brought together by the indefatigable energy of that impassioned humanitarian, Leblanc, the French ambassador at Washington, the chief of powers of the world were to meet in a last desperate conference, to save humanity. Leblanc was one of those ingenious men, whose lot would have been insignificant in any period of security, but who have been caught up to an immortal rôle in history, by the sudden simplification of human affairs through some tragical crisis, to the measure of their simplicity. Such a man was Abraham Lincoln, and such was Garibaldi, and Leblanc, with his transparent childish innocence, his entire self-forgetfulness, came into this confusion of distrust and intricate disaster with an invincible appeal for the manifest sanities of the situation. His voice, when he spoke, was full of remonstrance. He was a little bald, spectacled man, inspired by that intellectual idealism which has been one of the peculiar gifts of France to humanity. He was possessed of one clear persuasion, that war must end, that the only way to end war was to have but one government for mankind. He brushed aside all other considerations. At the very outbreak of the war, so soon as two capitals of the belligerents had been wrecked, he went to the President in the White House with his proposal. He made it as if it was a matter of course. He was fortunate to be in Washington and in touch with that gigantic childishness which was the characteristic of the American imagination, for the Americans also were among the simple peoples by whom the world was saved. He won over the American President and the American government to his general ideas. At any rate, they supported him sufficiently to give him a standing with the more skeptical European governments, and with this backing he set to work. It seemed the most fantastic of enterprises, to bring together all the rulers of the world and unify them. He wrote innumerable letters, he sent messages, he went on desperate journeys, He enlisted whatever support he could find. No one was too humble for an ally or too obstinate for his advances. Through the terrible autumn of the last wars this persistent little visionary in spectacles must have seemed rather like a hopeful canary twittering during a thunderstorm, and no accumulation of disasters daunted his conviction that they could be ended. For the whole world was flaring then into a monstrous phase of destruction. Power after power about the armed globe sought to anticipate attack by aggression. They went to war in a delirium of panic, in order to use their bombs first. China and Japan had assailed Russia and destroyed Moscow. The United States had attacked Japan. India was in anarchistic revolt with Delhi, a pit of fire spouting death and flame. The redoubtable king of the Balkans was mobilizing. It must have seemed plain, at last to everyone in those days, that the world was slipping headlong to anarchy. By the spring of 1959, from nearly 200 centers, and every week added to their number, roared the unquenchable crimson conflagrations of the atomic bombs. The flimsy fabric of the world's credit had vanished. Industry was completely disorganized in every city. Every thickly populated area was starving or trembling on the verge of starvation. Most of the capital cities of the world were burning. Millions of people had already perished, and over great areas government was at an end. Humanity had been compared by one contemporary writer to a sleeper who handles matches in his sleep and wakes to find himself in flames. For many months it was an open question whether there was to be found throughout all the race the will and intelligence to face these new conditions, and make even an attempt to arrest the downfall of the social order. For a time the war spirit defeated every effort to rally the forces of preservation and construction. Leblanc seemed to be protesting against earthquakes, and is likely to find a spirit of reason in the crater of Etna, even though the shattered official governments now clamored for peace. Bands of irreconcilables and invincible patriots, usurpers, adventurers, and political desperadoes were everywhere in possession of the simple apparatus for the disengagement of atomic energy and the initiation of new centers of destruction. The stuff exercised an irresistible fascination upon a certain type of mind. Why should anyone give in when he can still destroy his enemies? Surrender? While there is still a chance of blowing them to dust? The power of destruction, which had once been the ultimate privilege of government, was now the only power left in the world, and it was everywhere. There were few thoughtful men during that phase of blazing waste who did not pass through such moods of despair as Barnet describes, and declare with him, "This is the end." And all the while Leblanc was going to and fro with glittering glasses and an inexhaustible persuasiveness, urging the manifest reasonableness of his view upon ears that ceased presently to be inattentive. Never at any time did he betray a doubt that all this chaotic conflict would end. No nurse during a nursery uproar was ever so certain of the inevitable ultimate peace. From being treated as an amiable dreamer, he came by insensible degrees to be regarded as an extravagant possibility. Then he began to seem even practicable. The people who listened to him in 1958 with a smiling impatience were eager before 1959 was 4 months old to know just exactly what he thought might be done. He answered with the patience of a philosopher and the lucidity of a Frenchman. He began to receive responses of a more and more helpful type. He came across the Atlantic to Italy, and there he gathered in the promises for this Congress. He chose those high meadows above Brissago for the reasons we have stated. "We must get away," he said, "from old associations, He set to work requisitioning material for his conference, with an assurance that was justified by the replies. With a slight incredulity, the conference which was to begin a new order in the world gathered itself together. Leblanc summoned it without arrogance. He controlled it by virtue of an infinite humility. Men appeared upon those upland slopes with the apparatus for wireless telegraphy. Others followed with tents and provisions. A little cable was flung down to a convenient point upon the Locarno road below. Leblanc arrived, sedulously directing every detail that would affect the tone of the assembly. He might have been a courier in advance rather than the originator of the gathering. And then there arrived, some by the cable, most by aeroplane, a few in other fashions, the men who had been called together to confer upon the state of the world. It was to be a conference without a name. 9 monarchs, the presidents of 4 republics, a number of ministers and ambassadors, powerful journalists and such like prominent and influential men took part in it. There were even scientific men, and that world-famous old man, Holsten, came with the others to contribute his amateur statecraft to the desperate problem of the age. Only Leblanc would have dared so to summon figureheads and powers and intelligence, or have had the courage to hope for their agreement. Section 2. And one at least of those who were called to this conference of governments came to it on foot. This was King Egbert, the young king of the most venerable kingdom in Europe. He was a rebel, and had always been of deliberate choice a rebel against the magnificence of his position. He affected long pedestrian tours, and a disposition to sleep in the open air. He came now over the pass of St. Maria Maggiore, and by boat up the lake to Brissago. Thence he walked up the mountain, a pleasant path set with oaks and sweet chestnut. For provision on the walk, for he did not want to hurry, he carried with him a pocketful of bread and cheese. A certain small retinue that was necessary to his comfort and dignity upon occasions of state he sent on by the cable car, and with him walked his private secretary, Firmin, a man who had thrown up the professorship of world politics in the London School of Sociology, Economics, and Political Science, to take up these duties. Firmin was a man of strong rather than rapid thought. He had anticipated great influence in this new position, and after some years he was still only beginning to apprehend how largely his function was to listen. Originally he had been something of a thinker upon international politics, an authority upon tariffs and strategy, and a valued contributor to various of the higher organs of public opinion. But the atomic bombs had taken him by surprise, and he had still to recover completely from his pre-atomic opinions and the silencing effect of those sustained explosives. The king's freedom from the trammels of etiquette was very complete. In theory, and he abounded in theory, his manners were purely democratic. It was by a sheer habit and inadvertency that he permitted Firmin, who had discovered a rucksack in a small shop in the town below, to carry both bottles of beer. The king had never, as a matter of fact, carried anything for himself in his life, and he had never noted that he did not do so. "We will have nobody with us," he said, "at all. We will be perfectly simple." So Firmin carried the beer. As they walked up, it was the king who made the pace rather than Firmin. They talked of the conference before them, and Firmin, with a certain want of assurance that would have surprised him in himself in the days of his professorship, sought to define the policy of his companion. "In its broader form, sir," said Firmin, I admit a certain plausibility in the project of Leblanc's, but I feel that although it may be advisable to set up some sort of general control for international affairs, a sort of Hague Court with extended powers, that is no reason whatever for losing sight of the principles of national and imperial autonomy." "Firmin," said the king, "I am going to set my brother kings a good example." Firmin intimated a curiosity that veiled a dread. "By chucking all that nonsense," said the king. He quickened his pace as Firmin, who was already a little out of breath, betrayed a disposition to reply. "I am going to chuck all that nonsense," said the king, as Firmin prepared to speak. "I am going to fly my royalty and empire on the table, and declare at once I don't mean to haggle. It's haggling, about rights, has been the devil in human affairs, for always. I am going to stop this nonsense." Firmin halted abruptly. "But, sir," he cried. The king stopped 6 yards ahead of him, and looked back at his adviser's perspiring visage. "Do you really think, Firmin, that I am here as an infernal politician to put my crown and my flag and my claims and so forth in the way of peace? That little Frenchman is right. You know he is right as well as I do. Those things are over. We kings and rulers and representatives, have been at the very heart of the mischief. Of course we imply separation, and of course separation means the threat of war, and of course the threat of war means the accumulation of more and more atomic bombs. The old game's up. But, I say, we mustn't stand here, you know. The world waits. Don't you think the old game's up, Firmin?" Firmin adjusted a strap, passed a hand over his wet forehead, and followed earnestly. "I admit, sir," he said to a receding back, "that there has to be some sort of hegemony, some sort of amphictyonic council. There's got to be one simple government for all the world," said the king over his shoulder. "But as for a reckless, unqualified abandonment, sir—" "Bang!" cried the king. Firmin made no answer to this interruption, but a faint shadow of annoyance passed across his heated features. "Yesterday," said the king, by way of explanation, "the Japanese very nearly got San Francisco." "I hadn't heard, sir." "The Americans ran the Japanese aeroplane down into the sea, and there the bomb got busted." "Under the sea, sir?" "Yes, submarine volcano. The steam is in sight of the Californian coast. It was as near as that. And with things like this happening, you want me to go up this hill and haggle. Consider the effect of that on my imperial cousin, and all the others." "He will haggle, sir." "Not a bit of it," said the king. "But, sir—" "Leblanc won't let him." Firmin halted abruptly and gave a vicious pull at the offending strap. "Sir, he will listen to his advisers," he said, in a tone that in some subtle way seemed to implicate his master with the trouble of the knapsack. The king considered him. "We will go just a little higher," he said. "I want to find this unoccupied village they spoke of, and then we will drink that beer. It can't be far. We will drink the beer and throw away the bottles. And then, Firmin, I shall ask you to look at things in a more generous light, because, you know, you must." He turned about, and for some time the only sound they made was the noise of their boots upon the loose stones of the way and the irregular breathing of Firmin. At length, as it seemed to Firmin, or quite soon, as it seemed to the king, the gradient of the path diminished, the way widened out, and they found themselves in a very beautiful place indeed. It was one of those upland clusters of sheds and houses that are still to be found in the mountains of North Italy, buildings that were used only in the high summer, and which it was the custom to leave locked up and deserted through all the winter and spring, and up to the middle of June. The buildings were of a soft-toned gray stone, buried in rich green grass, shadowed by chestnut trees, and lit by an extraordinary blaze of yellow broom. Never had the king seen broom so glorious. He shouted at the light of it, for it seemed to give out more sunlight even than it received. He sat down impulsively on a lichenous stone, tugged out his bread and cheese, and bade Firmin thrust the beer into the shaded weeds to cool. "The things people miss, Firmin," he said, "who go up into the air in ships." Firmin looked around him with an ungenial eye. "You see it at its best, sir," he said, "before the peasants come here again and make it filthy." "It would be beautiful anyhow," said the king. "Superficially, sir," said Firmin, "but it stands for a social order that is fast vanishing away. Indeed, judging by the grass between the stones and in the huts, I am inclined to doubt if it is in use even now." "I suppose," said the king, "that they would come up immediately the hay on this flower meadow is cut. It would be those slow, creamy-colored beasts, I expect, one sees on the roads below, and swarthy girls with red handkerchiefs over their black hair. It is wonderful to think how long that beautiful old life lasted. In the Roman times, and long ages before ever the rumor of the Romans had come into these parts, men drove their cattle up into the places, as the summer came on. How haunted is this place! There have been quarrels here, hopes. Children have played here and lived to be old cronies and old gaffers, and died. And so it has gone on for thousands of lives. Lovers, innumerable lovers, have caressed amidst this golden broom." He meditated over a busy mouthful of bread and cheese. "We ought to have brought a tankard for that beer," he said. Firmin produced a folding aluminum cup, and the king was pleased to drink. "I wish, sir," said Firmin suddenly, "I could induce you at least to delay your decision." "It's no good talking, Firmin," said the king. "My mind's as clear as daylight." "Sire," protested Firmin, with his voice full of bread and cheese and genuine emotion, "have you no respect for your kingship?" The king paused before he answered with unwonted gravity. "It's just because I have, Firmin, that I won't be a puppet in this game of international politics." He regarded his companion for a moment, and then remarked, "Kingship! What do you know of kingship, Firmin?" "Yes," cried the king to his astonished counselor, "for the first time in my life I am going to be a king. I am going to lead, and lead by my own authority. For a dozen generations my family has been a set of dummies in the hands of their advisers. Advisers! Now I am going to be a real king, and I am going to abolish, dispose of, finish the crown to which I have been a slave. But what a world of paralyzing shams this roaring stuff has ended! The rigid old world is in the melting pot again, and I, who seem to be no more than the stuffing inside a regal robe, I am a king among kings. I have to play my part at the head of things, and put an end to blood and fire and idiot disorder." "But, sir," protested Firmin, "this man Leblanc is right. The whole world has got to be a republic, one and indivisible. You know that, and my duty is to make that easy. A king should lead his people. You want me to stick on their backs like some old man of the sea. Today must be a sacrament of kings. Our trust for mankind is done with and ended. We must part our robes among them. We must part our kingship among them, and say to them all, now the king and everyone must rule the world. Have you no sense of the magnificence of this occasion? You want me, Firmin, you want me to go up there and haggle like a damned little solicitor for some price, some compensation, some qualification?" Firmin shrugged his shoulders, and assumed an expression of despair. Meanwhile he conveyed, "One must eat." For a time neither spoke, and the king ate and turned over in his mind the phrases of speech he intended to make to the conference. By virtue of the antiquity of his crown he was to preside, and he intended to make his presidency memorable. Reassured of his eloquence, he considered the despondent and sulky Firmin for a space. "Firmin," he said, "you have idealed kingship." "It has been my dream, sir," said Firmin sorrowfully, "to serve." "At the levers, Firmin," said the king. "You are pleased to be unjust," said Firmin, deeply hurt. "I am pleased to be getting out of it," said the king. "Oh, Firmin," he went on, "have you no thought for me? Will you never realize that I am not only flesh and blood, but imagination, with its rights? I am a king in revolt against that fetter they put upon my head. I am a king awake. My reverend grandparents never in all their august lives had a waking moment. They loved the job that you, your advisers, gave them. They never had a doubt of it. It was like giving a doll to a woman who ought to have a child. They delighted in processions and opening things and being read addresses to, and visiting triplets and nonagenarians and all that sort of thing. Incredibly. They used to keep albums of cuttings from all the illustrated papers showing them at it, and if the press cutting partials grew thin, they were worried. It was all that ever worried them. But there is something atavistic in me. I hark back to unconstitutional monarchs. They christened me too retrogressively, I think. I wanted to get things done. I was bored. I might have fallen into vice. Most intelligent and energetic princes do. But the palace precautions were unusually thorough. I was brought up in the purest court the world has ever seen, alertly pure. So I read books, Firmin, and went about asking questions. The thing was bound to happen to one of us sooner or later, perhaps two. Very likely I am not vicious. I don't think I am." He reflected. "No," he said. Firmin cleared his throat. "I don't think you are, sir," he said. "You prefer—" He stopped short. He had been going to say talking. He substituted ideas. "That world of royalty," the king went on. "In a little while no one will understand it any more. It will become a riddle. Among other things, it was a world of perpetual best clothes. Everything was in its best clothes for us, and usually wearing bunting, with a cinema watching to see we took it properly. If you are a king, Firmin, and you go and look at a regiment, it instantly stops whatever it is doing, changes into full uniform and presents arms. When my august parents went in a train, the coal in the tender used to be whitened. It did, Firmin, and if coal had been white instead of black, I have no doubt the authorities would have blackened it. That was the spirit of our treatment. People were always walking about with their faces to us. One never saw anything in profile. One got an impression of a world that was insanely focused on ourselves. And when I began to poke my little questions into the Lord Chancellor and the Archbishop and all the rest of them about what I should see if people turned round, the general effect I produced was that I wasn't by any means displaying the royal tact they had expected of me." He meditated for a time. "And yet, you know, there is something in the kingship, Firmin. It stiffened up my august little grandfather. It gave my grandmother a kind of awkward dignity, even when she was cross. and she was very often cross. They both had a profound sense of responsibility. My poor father's health was wretched during his brief career. Nobody outside the circle knows just how he screwed himself up to things. My people expect it, he used to say of this tiresome duty or that. Most of the things they made him do were silly. It was part of a bad tradition. But there was nothing silly in the way he set about them. The spirit of kingship is a fine thing, Firmin. I feel it in my bones. I do not know what I might not be if I were not a king. I could die for my people, Firmin, and you couldn't. No, don't say you could die for me, because I know better. Don't think I forget my kingship, Firmin. Don't imagine that. I am a king, a kingly king, by right divine. The fact that I am also a chattering young man makes not the slightest difference to that. But the proper textbook for kings, Firmin, is none of the court memoirs and Welt politic books you would have had me read. It is the old Fraser's Golden Bough. Have you read that, Firmin? Firmin had. Those were the authentic kings. In the end they were cut up and a bit given to everybody. They sprinkled the nations with kingship. Firmin turned himself round and faced his royal master. "What do you intend to do, sir?" he asked. "If you will not listen to me, what do you propose to do this afternoon?" The king flicked crumbs from his coat. "Manifestly war has to stop forever, Firmin. Manifestly this can only be done by putting all the world under one government. Our crowns and flags are in the way. Manifestly they must go." "Yes, sir," interrupted Firmin. "But what government? I don't see what government you get by a universal abdication." "Well," said the king, with his hands about his knees, "we shall be the government." "The conference?" exclaimed Firmin. "Who else?" asked the king simply. "It's perfectly simple," he added to Firmin's tremendous silence. "But," cried Firmin, "you must have sanctions. Will there be no form of election, for example?" "Why should there be?" asked the king, with intelligent curiosity. "The consent of the governed." "Firmin, we are just going to lay down our differences and take over government, without any election at all, without any sanction. The governed will show their consent by silence. If any effective opposition arises, we shall ask it to come in and help. The true sanction of kingship is the grip upon the scepter. We aren't going to worry people to vote for us. I'm certain the mass of men does not want to be bothered with such things. We'll contrive a way for anyone interested to join in. That's quite enough in the way of democracy. Perhaps later, when things don't matter, we shall govern all right, Firmin. Government only becomes difficult when the lawyers get hold of it, and since these troubles began the lawyers are shy. Indeed, come to think of it, I wonder where all the lawyers are. Where are they? A lot, of course, were bagged, some of the worst ones, when they blew up my legislature. You never knew the late Lord Chancellor. Necessities bury rights, and create them. Lawyers live on dead rights disinterred. We've done with that way of living. We don't have more law than a code can cover, and beyond that, government will be free. Before the sun sets today, Firmin, trust me, we shall have made our abdications, all of us, and declared the world republic, supreme and indivisible. I wonder what my august grandmother would have made of it, all my rights, and then we shall go on governing. What else is there to do? All over the world we shall declare that there is no longer mine or thine, but ours. China, the United States, 2/3 of Europe, will certainly fall in and obey. They will have to do so. What else can they do?
Their official rulers are here with us. They won't be able to get together any sort of idea of not obeying us. Then we shall declare that every sort of property is held in trust for the Republic." "But, sir," cried Firmin, suddenly enlightened, "has this been arranged already?" "My dear Firmin, do you think we have come here, all of us, to talk at large? The talking has been done for half a century, talking and writing. We are here to set the new thing, the simple, obvious, necessary thing going." He stood up. Firmin, forgetting the habits of a score of years, remained seated. "Well," he said at last, "and I have known nothing." The king smiled cheerfully. He liked these walks with Firmin. Section 3. That conference upon the Brissago meadows was one of the most heterogeneous collections of prominent people that has ever met together. Principalities and powers, stripped and shadowed until all their pride and mystery were gone, met in a marvelous new humility. Here were kings and emperors whose capitals were lakes of flaming destruction, statesmen whose countries had become chaos, scared politicians and financial potentates. Here were leaders of thought and learned investigators dragged reluctantly to the control of affairs. Altogether there were 93 of them, Leblanc's conception of the head men of the world. They had all come to the realization of the simple truths that the indefatigable Leblanc had hammered into them, and, drawing his resources from the King of Italy, he had provisioned his conference with a generous simplicity quite in accordance with the rest of his character, and so at last was able to make his astonishing and entirely rational appeal. He had appointed King Egbert the President. He believed in this young man so firmly that he completely dominated him, and he spoke himself as a secretary might speak from the President's left hand, and evidently did not realize himself that he was telling them all exactly what they had to do. He imagined he was merely recapitulating the obvious features of the situation for their convenience. He was dressed in ill-fitting white silk clothes, and he consulted a dingy little packet of notes as he spoke. They put him out. He explained that he had never spoken from notes before, but that this occasion was exceptional. And then King Egbert spoke as he was expected to speak, and Leblanc's spectacles moistened at that flow of generous sentiment, most amiably and lightly expressed. "We haven't to stand on ceremony," said the king. "We have to govern the world. We have always pretended to govern the world, and here is our opportunity." "Of course," whispered Leblanc, nodding his head rapidly. "Of course. The world has been smashed up, and we have to put it on its wheels again," said King Egbert. "And it is the simple common sense of this crisis for all to help and none to seek advantage. Is that our tone or not?" The gathering was too old and seasoned and miscellaneous for any great displays of enthusiasm, but that was its tone, and with an astonishment that somehow became exhilarating it began to resign, repudiate, and declare its intentions. Firmin, taking notes behind his master, heard everything that had been foretold among the yellow broom come true. With a queer feeling that he was dreaming, he assisted at the proclamation of the world state, and saw the message taken out to the wireless operators to be throbbed all round the habitable globe. "And next," said King Egbert, with a cheerful excitement in his voice, "we have to get every atom of Carolinum, and all the plant for making it, into our control." Firmin was not alone in his incredulity. Not a man there who was not a very amiable, reasonable, benevolent creature at bottom. Some had been born to power, and some had happened upon it. Some had struggled to get it, not clearly knowing what it was and what it implied, but none was irreconcilably set upon its retention at the price of cosmic disaster. Their minds had been prepared by circumstances and sedulously cultivated by Leblanc, and now they took the broad, obvious road along which King Egbert was leading them, with a mingled conviction of strangeness and necessity. Things went very smoothly. The King of Italy explained the arrangements that had been made for the protection of the camp from any fantastic attack. A couple of thousand of aeroplanes, each carrying a sharpshooter, guarded them, and there was an excellent system of relays, and at night all the sky would be searched by scores of lights, and the admirable Leblanc gave luminous reasons for their camping just where they were, and going on with their administrative duties forthwith. He knew of this place, because he had happened upon it when holiday making with Madame Leblanc 20 years and more ago. "There is very simple fare at present," he explained, "on account of the disturbed state of the countries about us, but we have excellent fresh milk, good red wine, beef, bread, salad, and lemons. In a few days I hope to place things in the hands of a more efficient caterer." The members of the New World Government dined at 3 long tables on trestles, and down the middle of these tables Leblanc, in spite of the barrenness of his menu, had contrived to have a great multitude of beautiful roses. There was a similar accommodation for the secretaries and attendants at a lower level down the mountain. The assembly dined as it had debated, in the open air, and over the dark crags to the west the glowing June sunset shone upon the banquet. There was no precedency now among the 93, and King Egbert found himself between a pleasant little Japanese stranger in spectacles and his cousin of Central Europe, and opposite a great Bengali leader and the President of the United States of America. Beyond the Japanese was Holsten, the old chemist, and Leblanc was a little way down the other side. The king was cheerfully talkative and abounded in ideas. He fell presently into an amiable controversy with the American, who seemed to feel a lack of impressiveness in the occasion. It was ever the transatlantic tendency, due, no doubt, to the necessity of handling public questions in a bulky and striking manner, to overemphasize and over-accentuate, and the President was touched by his national failing. He suggested now that there should be a new era, starting from that day as the first day of the first year. The king demurred. "From this day forth, sir, man enters upon his heritage," said the American. "Man," said the king, "is always entering upon his heritage. You Americans have a peculiar weakness for anniversaries, if you will forgive me saying so. Yes, I accuse you of a lust for dramatic effect. Everything is happening always, but you want to say this or this is the real instant in time, and subordinate all the others to it." The American said something about an epoch-making day. "But surely," said the king, "you don't want us to condemn all humanity to a worldwide annual 4th of July forever and evermore, on account of this harmless necessary day of declarations. No conceivable day could ever deserve that. Ah! You do not know, as I do, the devastations of the memorable. My poor grandparents were rubricated. The worst of these huge celebrations is that they break up the dignified succession of one's contemporary emotions. They interrupt, they set back. Suddenly out come the flags and fireworks, and the old enthusiasms are furbished up, and it's sheer destruction of the proper thing that ought to be going on. Sufficient unto the day is the celebration thereof. Let the dead past bury its dead. You see, in regard to the calendar, I am for democracy, and you are for aristocracy. All things I hold are august, and I have a right to be lived through on their merits. No day should be sacrificed on the grave of departed events. What do you think of it, Wilhelm?" "For the noble, yes. All days should be noble." "Exactly my position," said the king, and felt pleased at what he had been saying. And then, since the American pressed his idea, the king contrived to shift the talk from the question of celebrating the epoch they were making to the question of the probabilities that lay ahead. Here everyone became diffident. They could see the world unified and at peace, but what detail was to follow from that unification they seemed indisposed to discuss. This diffidence struck the king as remarkable. He plunged upon the possibilities of science. All the huge expenditure that had hitherto gone into unproductive naval and military preparations must now, he declared, place research upon new footing. "Where one man worked we will have 1,000," he appealed to Holsten. "We have only begun to peep into these possibilities," he said. "You at any rate have sounded the vaults of the treasure house." "They are unfathomable," smiled Holsten. Man," said the American, with a manifest resolve to justify and reinstate himself after the flickering contradictions of the king, "man, I say, is only beginning to enter upon his heritage." "Tell us some of the things you believe we shall presently learn. Give us an idea of the things we may presently do," said the king to Holsten. Holsten opened out the visas. "Science," the king cried presently, "is the new king of the world." "Our view," said the president, "is that sovereignty resides with the people." "No," said the king, "the sovereign is a being more subtle than that, and less arithmetical. Neither my family nor your emancipated people. It is something that floats about us, and above us, and through us. It is that common impersonal will and sense of necessity, of which science is the best understood and most typical aspect. It is the mind of the race. It is that which brought us here, which has bowed us all to its demands." He paused and glanced down the table at Leblanc, and then reopened at his former antagonist. "There is a disposition," said the king, "to regard this gathering as if it were actually doing what it appears to be doing, as if we 90-odd men of our own free will and wisdom were unifying the world. There is a temptation to consider ourselves exceptionally fine fellows, and masterful men, and all the rest of it. We are not. I doubt if we should average out as anything abler than any other casually selected body of 90-odd men. We are no creators. We are consequences. We are salvagers, or salvagees. The thing today is not ourselves, but the wind of conviction that has blown us hither." The American had to confess he could hardly agree with the king's estimate of their average. "Holster, perhaps, and one or two others, might lift us a little," the king conceded. "But the rest of us?" His eyes flitted once more towards Leblanc. "Look at Leblanc," he said. "He's just a simple soul. There are hundreds and thousands like him. I admit a certain dexterity, a certain lucidity, but there is not a country town in France where there is not a Leblanc or so to be found about 2 o'clock in its principal café. It's just that he isn't complicated or supermannish, or any of those things that has made all he has done possible. But in happier times, don't you think, Wilhelm, he would have remained just what his father was, a successful epicier, very clean, very accurate, very honest, and on holidays he would have gone out with Madame Leblanc and her knitting in a punt with a jar of something gentle, and have sat under a large, reasonable, green-lined umbrella, and fished very nearly and successfully for gudgeon. The President and the Japanese Prince in spectacles protested together. "If I do him an injustice," said the King, "it is only because I want to elucidate my argument. I want to make it clear how small are men in days, and how great is man in comparison." Section 4. So it was King Egbert talked at Brissago after they had proclaimed the unity of the world. Every evening after that, the assembly dined together and talked at their ease, and grew accustomed to each other and sharpened each other's ideas. And every day they worked together, and really for a time believed they were inventing a new government for the world. They discussed the Constitution. But there were matters needing attention too urgently to wait for any constitution. They attended to these incidentally. The Constitution it was that waited. It was presently found convenient to keep the Constitution waiting indefinitely, as King Egbert had foreseen, and meanwhile, with an increasing self-confidence, that council went on governing. On this first evening of all the council's gatherings, after King Egbert had talked for a long time, and drunken and praised very abundantly the simple red wine of the country that Leblanc had procured for them, he fathered about him a group of congenial spirits, and fell into a discourse upon simplicity, praising it above all things, and declaring that the ultimate aim of art, religion, philosophy, and science alike was to simplify. He instanced himself as a devotee to simplicity, and Leblanc he instanced as a crowning instance of the splendor of this quality. Upon that they all agreed. When at last the company about the tables broke up, the King found himself brimming over with a peculiar affection and admiration for Leblanc. He made his way to him and drew him aside, and broached what he declared was a small matter. There was, he said, a certain order in his gift that, unlike all the other orders and decorations in the world, had never been corrupted. It was reserved for elderly men of supreme distinction, the acuteness of whose gifts was already touched to mellowness, and it had included the greatest names of every age, so far as the advisers of his family had been to ascertain them. At present, the King admitted, these matters of stars and badges were rather obscured by more urgent affairs. For his own part, he had never set any value upon them at all. But a time might come when they would be at last interesting, and in short, he wished to confer the Order of Merit upon Leblanc. His sole motive in doing so, he added, was his strong desire to signalize his personal esteem. He laid his hand upon the Frenchman's shoulder as he said these things, with an almost brotherly affection. Leblanc received this proposal with a modest confusion that greatly enhanced the King's opinion of his admirable simplicity. He pointed out that eager as he was to snatch at the proffered distinction, it might at the present stage appear invidious, and he therefore suggested that the conferring of it should be postponed, until it could be made the crown and conclusion of his services. The King was unable to shake this resolution, and the two men parted with expressions of mutual esteem. The King then summoned Firmin in order to make a short note of a number of things that he had said during the day. but after about 20 minutes' work the sweet sleepiness of the mountain air overcame him, and he dismissed Firmin and went to bed and fell asleep at once, and slept with extreme satisfaction. He had an active, agreeable day. Section 5. The establishment of the new order that was thus so humanly begun, was, if one measures it by the standard of any preceding age, a rapid progress. The fighting spirit of the world was exhausted. Only here or there did fierceness linger. For long decades the combative side in human affairs had been monstrously exaggerated by the accidents of political separation. This now became luminously plain. An enormous proportion of the force that sustained armaments had been nothing more aggressive than the fear of war and warlike neighbors. It is doubtful if any large section of the men actually enlisted for fighting ever at any time really hungered and thirsted for bloodshed and danger. That kind of appetite was probably never very strong in the species after the savage stage was past. The army was a profession, in which killing had become a disagreeable possibility, rather than an eventful certainty. If one reads the old newspapers and periodicals of that time, which did so much to keep militarism alive, one finds very little about glory and adventure and a constant harping on the disagreeableness of invasion and subjugation. In one word, militarism was funk. The belligerent resolution of the armed Europe of the 20th century was the resolution of a fiercely frightened sheep to plunge. And now that its weapons were exploding in its hands, Europe was only too eager to drop them, and abandon this fancied refuge of violence. For a time the whole world had been shocked into frankness. Nearly all the clever people who had hitherto sustained the ancient belligerent separations had now been brought to realize the need for simplicity of attitude and openness of mind. And in this atmosphere of moral renaissance, there was little attempt to get negotiable advantages out of resistance to the new order. Human beings are foolish enough to doubt, but few have stopped to haggle in a fire escape. The council had its way with them. The band of "patriots" who seized the laboratories and arsenal just outside Osaka, and tried to rouse Japan to revolt against inclusion in the Republic of Mankind, found they had miscalculated the national pride, and met the swift vengeance of their own countrymen. That fight in the arsenal was a vivid incident in this closing chapter of the history of war. To the last the "patriots" were undecided whether, in the event of a defeat, they would explode their supply of atomic bombs or not. They were fighting with swords outside the iridium doors, and the moderates of their number were at bay and on the verge of destruction. Only 10, indeed, remained unwounded when the Republicans burst in to the rescue.